If anyone ever caught a whiff of my real scent, I'd be kicked out of the academy faster than I could say my own name. That thought had been my constant companion since day one. Today, it was pounding in my head louder than the roaring crowd circling the training grounds. Dust clung to my throat. Sweat stung my eyes. The metallic taste of blood coated my tongue where I'd bitten the inside of my cheek. And yet, I refused to give up ground. Not to him. Not to anyone. The cadet in front of me, Bran, a broad-shouldered beta with the smug grin of someone who'd never had to fight uphill, lunged again. His fist sliced the air, grazing my jaw. Pain bloomed, but I caught his wrist, twisted, and slammed him into the packed dirt. Gasps erupted from the watching students. Someone even cheered. I locked his arm behind his back, pressing my knee into his spine. "You yield?" I hissed, my breath ragged. He snarled. "Get off me." So I pressed harder. Not because I had to, because I wanted to, because every time someone like Bran looked at me, they saw someone ordinary, beta, neutral, harmless, and if I didn't remind them otherwise they'd never shut up about it. The referee barked. "Point to Cadet Lucan." Applause rippled across the grounds. Bran cursed under his breath as I released him. I staggered to my feet, my ribs screaming in protest. The injury from last week hadn't healed, not with these endless drills. But I'd rather crawl through broken glass than admit weakness. Weakness. The word curdled in my stomach like spoiled milk. I couldn't afford it. Not here. Not ever. Because I wasn't what they thought. Beneath the chemical suppressants flooding my system, beneath the carefully neutral posture I'd practiced since I was 16, I was Omega. And Omegas didn't belong on the battlefield. Omegas didn't lead squads. Omegas were caged, collared, and protected. A polite word for owned. The academy didn't need to know that part. "Show off," Bran spat as he limped off. His pride was more bruised than his body, but that suited me fine. I tugged my practice jacket back into place, trying to ignore the sting in my side. My block suppressants hadn't worn off yet, thank the gods, but adrenaline always made them strain. And adrenaline was the one thing this place specialized in. "You look like you enjoyed that," muttered Jay, my roommate, as he tossed me a water bottle. A wiry beta with too much grin for his own good, Jay had a knack for appearing at my side whenever I wanted to be alone. "Enjoyed?" I wiped the blood off my lip. "It was survival." "Right." He smirked. "Survival with style." I rolled my eyes and took a gulp of water, savoring the cold against my raw throat. Around us, cadets dispersed, some throwing me glances, curiosity, annoyance, maybe even respect. That last one mattered. Respect kept people from asking questions. Respect made me untouchable. Or, so I told myself. The whistle blew, shrill and commanding, cutting through the noise. A hush fell over the grounds. Heads turned toward the platform. That's when I saw him. The man who stepped onto the field moved like he owned the ground beneath his boots. Tall, easily a head above most of us, with a lean, sculpted frame that spoke of endless battles fought and won. His uniform was black, pristine, tailored to perfection. Even from a distance I caught the gleam of the collar at his throat, an inhibitor, polished steel pressing against tanned skin. An alpha. No, not just any alpha. The alpha. The whispers started immediately. "That's him. Remi Kael. The officer from the Northern Campaign. He's insane. They say he volunteered for suppression." The name was familiar even to me. Stories of his missions traveled faster than supply lines. The fearless soldier who never lost, the alpha who had shackled himself with steel and sheer willpower. A legend in the flesh. And now he was here, our new instructor. I told myself not to stare. I failed spectacularly. His eyes swept over the crowd, icy, assessing, and utterly impersonal, until they landed on me, just for a fraction of a second, but long enough for my breath to catch in my throat. Long enough for the hair at the nape of my neck to rise, as though my body recognized something my mind refused to admit. I forced myself to look away, clenching the bottle so tightly my knuckles ached. He couldn't know. No one could. I wasn't Omega here. I was just another cadet. Still, something about the steel around his throat, the way he carried it, not like a burden but like a weapon, carved itself into my mind, and I hated the way it made me feel. The first thing Remi Kael did when he took the platform was nothing. He didn't shout, didn't posture, he just stood there, black uniform cut knife-sharp against the pale sky, hands clasped behind his back. Silence rippled out from him like a pressure wave, until the training grounds forgot how to breathe. Fall in, he said at last, quietly. Every cadet snapped into formation as if dragged by a wire. Even Jay, who usually needed a personal invitation to act serious, squared his shoulders so fast I heard his joints complain. I held still and studied him because pretending not to look would have been more suspicious. Up close, the steel collar at his throat wasn't ornamental. It was tech. Segment plates fitted flush to one another, tight as a second skin. Microvents dotted the inner rim, no bigger than pinheads. I knew those. Odor suppressants. If the stories were true, that collar carried enough inhibitors to smother a pack. He paced down our line. The ground didn't dare crunch under his boots. I don't care what you did before this morning, he said. Your past victories don't impress me. Your excuses won't interest me. You are here to learn one thing, control. If you lack it, you will borrow mine. A Beta 2 cadets down blinked and swallowed audibly. Jay's breath hitched beside me. I kept my eyes front, jaw set, heartbeat steady. My blockades were holding. The chemical hum beneath my skin was a cold, constant tide. Remi stopped in front of Bran. Yesterday's sore loser. You telegraph your right hook with your shoulder, Remi said. Fix it. Bran flushed. Yes, sir. Remi moved on. Another cadet. Grip too loose. Another, footwork lazy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Corrections were delivered like verdicts, clipped and exact. Then he reached me. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. I didn't look at him, I looked through him, at a point somewhere beyond. His left ear, the way you do when an armed bomb asks for eye contact. Cadet Lucan, he said. So he knew my name. Of course he did. Instructors, read files. Yes, sir. He studied my stance. Your balance is precise. A beat. Your restraint is not. A few cadets snorted softly, hungry for entertainment. Jay made a small, oh no sound that tried to be a cough. My restraint is excellent, sir, I said pleasantly. I use it daily, right after breakfast. Somewhere behind us, a beta choked on a laugh and immediately strangled it. Heads tilted just enough to watch without being caught watching. Remi's face did not change. Is that what you call throwing a cadet into the dirt hard enough to rattle his ancestors? Restraint? He requested a demonstration, I said. I obliged. A long, quiet moment stretched. The sun burned on the steel at his throat, turning it into a narrow halo that didn't look like mercy. Very well, he said. Since you're generous with demonstrations, you can offer one now. Pair with me. Someone actually whispered, oh no, like this was theater and not our lives. We stepped onto the mat. My palms tingled. He raised his hands, open, a neutral guard. The collar clicked softly, some internal calibrator adjusting to exertion. Up close I saw the weld along the back plate. Smooth, professional, permanent. Ready, cadet? He asked. Always, I said, because my mouth had a death wish. The first exchange was clean, test, touch, retreat. He didn't go for dominance. He went for precision, angles, leverage, the kind of economy you only earn by having bled for it. I matched him. My ribs complained, my breath measured itself in exact coins. He hooked my wrist, I slipped and redirected. He countered and I rolled, recovered. We weren't trying to win. We were taking each other's measure with calipers. Your center is good, he said. Your temper is not. I keep it on a leash, I said. Mostly. Get a shorter leash. He swept low. I hopped, pivoted, and landed. Too close. The world narrowed to a black uniform, a line of throat above steel, the light snagging in his eyes. He didn't blink. You mistake defiance for strength, he said, almost conversational. You mistake silence for discipline, I shot back. A ripple went through the watching cadets. Jay's hands were probably over his face. Remi's mouth curved, just barely. Not a smile. A dangerous draft of one. Lecture hall, 10 minutes. We will see how your strength survives boredom. He let me go with a pressure at my wrist that said he could have put me on my back and didn't. I hated that the knowledge thrilled me. The lecture hall was colder than the yard, all white light and flat. Screens, the air threaded with the antiseptic bite of recirculation. We filed into rows. Remi stood at the front and drew a schematic of command triangles, with the steady patience of an executioner sharpening a blade. Chain of command, he said. You follow it even when it inconveniences your ego, especially then. Bran raised a hand, eager to be redeemed. Sir, What if the officer is wrong? Then you make him right, Remi said. Quietly. Laughter. Nervous. He didn't laugh. He talked control strategies, escalation protocols, scent management in mixed units, a clinical phrase that made my skin crawl. He touched the collar once, almost absently, and the room leaned forward as if drawn. Suppression, he said, tapping the steel. A tool, not a virtue. If you rely on it, you've already lost control. Jay scribbled in his notes. Collar not a virtue? Tell Luke later, and pretend it was my idea. When the hour ended, cadets stood by reflex. Remi dismissed them with a nod. Bodies flowed toward the exits, except mine. Because Remi's gaze had pinned me in place long before he spoke. Lucan, he said. Stay. Jay shot me a look that said don't die, then scampered with the others. We were alone with the hum of the vents. Remi walked down the aisle, unhurried. The collar's segments whispered against one another. Soft, mechanical breath. He stopped a step away, looking down at me like a puzzle worth solving. Your performance is exemplary, he said. Your attitude is not. I can work on my attitude, I said. If you can work on your compliments. Noted. He leaned in, just slightly, as if to examine a bruise along my jaw I hadn't noticed. The metal at his throat caught the light. And the air shifted. It was nothing. Less than nothing. A slip in the sterile current, a warmth like sun through glass, a thread of scent so faint it could have been imagined. Cedar after rain, the whisper of heat at the base of my skull that said alpha in a voice I had trained years to ignore. Impossible. My pulse spiked so hard I felt it in my mouth. The suppressants in my blood surged to meet a threat that shouldn't exist. Remi's eyes flicked, there and gone, like he felt it too. I didn't breathe. He didn't move. Then the vents sighed, and the sterile chills swept back in as if nothing had happened at all. The locker room reeked of sweat, detergent, and the faint sting of antiseptic wipes. Normally the smell was just background noise, anonymity wrapped in steam, but today it clawed at me like a warning siren. I dropped onto the bench, heart hammering, and yanked at the cuff of my sleeve. My pulse throbbed under my skin, as I pressed my fingers against the small patch embedded in the crook of my arm. Still sealed. Still warm. Still releasing the cocktail of suppressants that had been my armor for years. Come on, I muttered, ripping open my locker to grab the small vial tucked behind my boots. I popped the cap and inhaled. The sharp chemical sting bit my nose. Blockers. Untouched. So why had I smelled him? The memory still lingered, phantom and impossible, cedar after rain, crisp and wild, sparking like electricity along my spine. My body had recognized it instantly, even if my brain screamed denial. That scent had no business existing in a room with a collared alpha. And certainly not near me. I scrubbed at my face with both hands, trying to erase the thought. Still alive in here? Jay's voice drifted in from the row of lockers. He strolled around the corner, hair damp, grinning like always. Thought maybe the captain of restraint had finally fainted. Not funny. My tone was sharper than I meant, but my nerves were frayed wire. He blinked, then raised his hands. Okay. Geez. What crawled under your skin? Nothing I could explain. Not without unraveling everything. Just sore, I muttered. Jay didn't buy it, but he was smart enough not to push. He whistled his way out, leaving me alone with the echo of my own pulse. I checked the patch again. The seal light blinked green. Perfect function. My chest tightened with a frustration that tasted like fear. If the blockers weren't failing, then the problem wasn't chemical. The problem was me. The corridors of the academy always smelled of steel polish and recycled air, but I couldn't shake the ghost of cedar following me like a shadow. Every group of cadets I passed seemed to glance my way. Whispers rose and fell, too quick to catch. And then there he was. Remi. Standing at the far end of the hall, speaking quietly with another officer. His posture was military perfection, but when his eyes flicked toward me, the conversation faltered. For one terrifying second, the full weight of his attention pinned me where I stood. Sharp, unrelenting, as if he could peel back layers I'd spent years welding shut. I forced my legs to keep walking, forced my shoulders to stay square. I would not look away first. But he did something worse. He waited until I was passing, then spoke low enough for only me to hear. What are you? The words sliced through me like a blade. Not who, what? I froze, heat crawling up the back of my neck. My heart screamed to run, my body screamed to kneel, and my mind screamed to do neither. Slowly, I turned my head just enough to meet his gaze. His eyes were pale steel, steady, unreadable. I smiled, sharp as glass. Something you'll never get your hands on. For a fraction of a second, his mouth twitched. Amusement, irritation, I couldn't tell. Then he stepped back, dismissing me as easily as he'd drawn me in. I walked away on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. By evening, the academy was buzzing. Whispers swirled in corners, trailed through mess lines, echoed in the dorm halls. Did you hear? Captain Kale kept Lucan back after class. They say he's testing him personally. No, he's got a favorite already. I shut my door on the noise, leaning my forehead against the cool metal. My hands shook. Not from fear exactly, but from the precarious edge I was walking. Favorites. If only they knew. If only they understood that being seen by him was the last thing I wanted. Because every glance, every word, every impossible shift of air between us, it pulled at something buried so deep inside me, I'd forgotten it could wake. And if it woke fully, there would be no hiding what I really was. The training hall smelled of dust and varnished wood, with the faint tang of old sweat soaked into the mats. Rows of cadets lined the perimeter, their chatter a nervous buzz. Finally Bran muttered behind me, loud enough for the crowd. Instructor's going to put the loudmouth in his place. I ignored him. My palms itched anyway. At the center of the hall, Remi stood waiting. Black uniform immaculate, collar gleaming under the overhead lights. He might have been carved from stone, if stone could radiate quiet menace. All right, cadets, barked the referee. Pair demonstration. Instructor Kyle will engage Cadet Lucan. Observation only, no interference. Murmurs rippled like a current through the line. Every eye locked onto me. They wanted a show. They wanted me crushed. I stepped onto the mat, every movement deliberate, controlled. My ribs ached from practice, but pain was nothing compared to the white noise inside my skull. Don't react, don't reveal, don't breathe wrong. Remi inclined his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge me. Still eager to demonstrate restraint? I smirked, though my throat was dry. I'd hate to deprive everyone of the lesson, sir. The corner of his mouth twitched, annoyance, amusement, maybe both. Very well. Lesson begins. The referee barked. Begin! He moved first. A blur of precision, testing footwork. I parried, blocking high, pivoting low. My muscles remembering drills drilled into drills. He wasn't holding back, not much. Just enough to push, to press, to see where I'd crack. Center, he said, voice calm as ever. Hold it. I'm holding just fine, I shot back, ducking under a strike. Then why are you off balance? I snarled, twisting, driving forward. He caught my wrist mid-strike, spun me, but I rolled and slipped free. The cadets gasped. He came again. Quick, relentless, clean. Every contact reverberated through me, skin to skin, jarring. His body heat was steady, controlled. But every time his hand brushed mine, every time his chest pressed close, the world tilted. And then, the air shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't visible. But it was there, the crack of a seal, the slip of scent bleeding into sterile air. Cedar, sharp and wild, colliding with the sterile tang of blockers leaching from my skin. My vision tunneled. My body jolted as if struck. Not here. Not now. I staggered back, lungs heaving, but the scent clung, stubborn, undeniable. Around us the cadets frowned, whispering at the sudden tension. Remi froze, eyes narrowing, chest rising a fraction too fast. His grip faltered for the first time. Control, he rasped, almost to himself. I tried. Gods, I tried. But the chemicals in my blood bucked against instinct, boiling under my skin. Heat coiled low in my spine. Hunger gnawed sharp and savage, screaming to be answered. He stepped in. Too close. My pulse roared. His scent punched through my chest like a brand, and my own, traitorous, buried for years, slipped free. Gasps from the crowd. No, no, no. I shoved hard, breaking contact, but the damage was done. I saw it in his face, the recognition. The truth. His voice was low, rough around the edges in a way it hadn't been before. Omega. The words slammed into me like a hammer. I bared my teeth. Say that louder, and I'll prove exactly how wrong you are. He blinked, startled. By my defiance, by his own reaction, I couldn't tell. But the world was already collapsing inward, the sense tangled, undeniable. Every instinct screamed to stay, to answer to. I bolted. 1 second I was on the mat, the next I was shoving through the stunned line of cadets, ignoring their questions, their laughter, their wide-eyed shock. My chest burned, my lungs tore at the air. Lucan. Jay's voice called somewhere behind me. I didn't stop. I couldn't. If I stopped, if I let myself feel even 1 more second, I'd shatter everything I'd built. I burst into the corridor, slammed through a door, braced my palms against the cold wall. My breath came in harsh, ragged bursts, my whole body trembling with adrenaline and fury. Weakness. That cursed word again, branding itself across my mind. I hated him. I hated myself more. And worst of all, I hated that for one treacherous heartbeat buried under panic, it hadn't felt like weakness at all. The common room smelled of instant noodles, old socks and desperation, basically cadet perfume. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in the color of stale paper. Jay sprawled across the couch with a deck of cards, shuffling like a bored gambler killing time before execution. I dropped into the chair opposite, dragging both hands over my face. My pulse was still uneven from earlier. Every time I closed my eyes I felt the mat under my feet, the crowd's gasp, Remi's voice cutting the air with that single word. Omega. Jay glanced up, eyebrows raised. So, do I congratulate you on surviving, or offer condolences? Neither. My voice came out hoarse. He tilted his head. Condolences then? I shot him a glare. Jay grinned. What? I'm just saying, it's not every day someone gets to wrestle with the Remi Kael and come out alive. Twice. Alive is debatable, I muttered. He flicked a card at me. Admit it. You're enjoying the attention. Enjoying? I caught the card, snapped it in half. I'd rather eat my own boots. Jay whistled low. So defensive. Almost like you've got a crush. The chair legs screeched as I leaned forward. Say that again, and I'll make sure you never sit comfortably again. His grin widened. Touchy. Definitely a crush. I wanted to scream. Instead I clenched my fists until the broken card crumbled to pulp. Jay let the silence stretch before softening. Look. I'm kidding. Mostly. But you have to admit the guy's different. That was one word for it. Dangerous was another. Impossible was the only accurate one. I didn't answer. Rumors ran faster than bullets in the academy, and I didn't even need to eavesdrop to hear them now. Everyone was talking about the clash. About me. About him. And him, Remi. He didn't deny any of it. Didn't confirm either. Just kept his distance, cold as ever, as though nothing had happened. Except every time I caught his eyes across a hall, my skin buzzed like I was standing too close to live wire. There were stories about him, of course. Legends whispered in bunks at night. How he once walked away from a bond, just rejected it, clean cut, when every instinct should have chained him down. How he volunteered for suppression instead, underwent the procedure that fused steel to his skin and flooded his body with inhibitors until even his own scent betrayed nothing. A bond refused. A bond crushed. He'd chosen discipline over instinct, the soldier's path over the alphas, and yet here he was, collared and cold, and still the scent slipped through. Still, it reached for me. Jay sprawled upside down on the couch now, head hanging over the edge. You know what the scariest part is? He asked, staring at me from an angle that made him look like a particularly smug bat. What? You're not scared of him? I barked a laugh. Are you blind? I ran out of there like the floor was on fire. Sure, he said. But you didn't cower. You didn't roll over. You fight him. Every time? Because someone has to, I snapped. Jay shrugged, flipping a card into the air and catching it. Or maybe because you're the only one who can. I froze. The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. The only one. I thought of Remi's face in the hall, the crack in his composure when the scent bled through. I thought of the way his hand had tightened just a fraction too long on my wrist, like something inside him had slipped the leash. He avoided closeness with everyone. That collar wasn't just suppression, it was armor. But with me, the armor cracked. With me, the scent returned. And for the first time the thought didn't make me feel powerful. It made me feel trapped. Because if I was the one who broke his walls, then maybe he could break mine. The sky opened up just as evening drills began, turning the training yard into a slick, shining pit of mud. Rain hammered against the mats, drummed on helmets, hissed against the floodlights until the whole place shimmered like liquid glass. Again, Remi's voice cut through the storm, steady and merciless. I gritted my teeth and reset my stance. My arms ached from repetition, my shoulders screamed from strain, and still he wasn't satisfied. "Your guard is lazy," he said, circling me. Water dripped down his jaw, caught on the edges of his steel collar before sliding down his neck. He didn't even flinch at the cold. Of course he didn't. "My guard is fine," I snapped, lunging forward, striking the move exactly as instructed. "Then why do I see openings?" "Maybe because you're obsessed with them." The cadets watching from the covered stands tried to stifle their laughter. Jay wasn't even trying. His cackle carried across the storm until Bran elbowed him quiet. Remi's eyes sharpened. "Commanders don't make excuses, they survive." Again. I wanted to break something. Preferably his face. Instead, I reset and came at him once more, mud splattering up my legs as we clashed. His block was effortless, his counter precise. I landed flat on my back, the rain smacking against my face in mocking applause. "Get up," he said. I spat water and pushed myself up. "You enjoy this way too much." He raised a brow. "What gave me away?" "The sadistic glint in your eye." That almost drew a smile. Instead, he folded his arms. Again. I went at him harder this time, fury and fatigue tangling in my chest. Each movement was sloppy with frustration, but I refused to stop. The storm drowned the world. It was just me, him, and the pounding of blood and rain. "You think strength is shouting louder," he said, catching my wrist mid-swing. "But shouting won't keep your people alive. You think cold silence will?" I twisted, slipping free, slamming my palm against his guard. "I'll take shouting any day. You want to lead, Lucan?" His voice was sharp now, a challenge thrown like a knife. "Then prove you can survive." I staggered back, chest heaving, water plastering my hair to my forehead. For once, I didn't snap. I didn't spit sarcasm. I just met his gaze through the sheets of rain, and admitted something I'd been choking on for weeks. I didn't hate him. Not entirely. The thought struck like lightning, burning through my defenses. Yes, I loathed the way he pushed me, the way he looked at me like he saw through every lie I'd built. But under the loathing, braided with it like barbed wire and silk, was something else. Something that pulled at me every time he drew closer. And the worst part? He knew it. I saw it in the flicker of his eyes before he turned away. Again he repeated, softer this time. I would have snapped back, but that's when the alarm went off. A shrill, gut-punching wail split the storm. The ground seemed to vibrate with it, a warning drilled into our bones from day one. Cadets jerked to attention, whispers flying. Another drill? At this hour? In this weather? The red lights flashing along the barracks didn't look like drills. Remi's expression shifted, subtle but enough, the steel mask snapping tighter, eyes narrowing, body coiled. Inside. He barked to the cadets on the sidelines. They scrambled, half tripping over one another in their rush. My chest tightened. Something was wrong. This wasn't practice. The sirens howled like wounded animals, their echoes bouncing through the steel bones of the academy. Red emergency lights strobed across the corridors, painting cadet faces in sharp, panicked slices of crimson. Then came the boom. A bone-deep thunder that shook the floor and sent a rain of plaster dust from the ceiling. The first explosion. Not a drill. Not a test. Cadets bolted in every direction. Orders crackled over the comm system, scrambled and half-garbled by static. Somewhere, someone was shouting for medics. The acrid bite of smoke seeped into the air. I pressed myself against the wall, heart slamming like it wanted out. Chaos spread like fire, eating discipline in seconds. And then Remi was there. He cut through the corridor like a blade, movements precise even as the building trembled. His voice lashed through the panic. Form ranks, evacuation protocols, now. Most cadets responded instinctively, clumping into groups, but their fear turned their steps clumsy. Another blast rattled the ground, closer this time. I forced my body forward, half running, half dragged by instinct to keep up with him. And that was my first mistake. Because up close, in the storm of smoke and fire, his scent broke loose again. Stronger. Fiercer. The collar hissed like it was overloading, inhibitor vents releasing in frantic spurts, but the cedar and rain cut through anyway, slamming into me. It clawed at the inside of my skull, tugged at the deepest part of me I'd spent years drowning in chemicals. My blood roared. My breath came shallow. Not now. Not here. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted iron, anchoring myself in the sharp sting. I could not afford to unravel, not in the middle of this chaos. Remi didn't look at me. He was too busy slamming a door control shut, sealing off a collapsing section of hull. But I caught the twitch in his jaw, the flicker of awareness. He felt it too. "Lucan," he barked. "Keep them moving." It wasn't a request. I turned to the cluster of cadets frozen near the junction. Wide eyes, pale faces, no direction. And no senior officers in sight. The comm static screamed uselessly, the chain of command collapsing under fire. I didn't think. I couldn't. Move. My voice cracked like a whip. "Left corridor, double line, keep your heads down, now." They jerked like marionettes yanked back to life. Feet pounded against the tile as they scrambled into motion. Another explosion rocked the walls. I shoved a cadet forward before the ceiling dust could bury him. "Medics to the rear," I shouted. "Anyone armed, flank positions." The words spilled from me like I'd been waiting my whole life to use them. My chest burned with adrenaline, but the fear that usually came with it didn't stick. Something else rose instead. A brutal clarity. For the first time, I wasn't just hiding. I was leading. We pushed deeper into the base, smoke thickening. Fire alarms screamed overhead. Somewhere ahead, gunfire rattled like hail. Remi charged into the fray, weapon already drawn, movements sharp and merciless. He fought like the storm itself, every strike decisive, every motion a calculation in destruction. And I couldn't stop watching. Not because he was terrifying, though he was, but because even in the chaos, he looked back once, just once, to make sure I was still there. The scent poured off him in waves now, intoxicating, dangerous, wrong. My knees threatened to buckle, but I forced myself straight. I would not be claimed by instinct. Not here. Not now. Another officer staggered past, clutching a bleeding arm. "Command is down," he gasped. "The general's communications severed." He collapsed before finishing. The words echoed like a verdict. Command was gone. The academy was headless. Around me, cadets faltered, unsure, looking for orders that weren't coming. And in that moment, something inside me crystallized. If no one else could lead, then I would. I stepped onto a crate toppled in the corridor, raising my voice until it cut through the wail of alarms. "Cadets, fall in!" Dozens of eyes turned toward me, desperate, waiting. "Evacuation routes Bravo and Charlie are compromised," I shouted. We moved through Delta Hall to the auxiliary hangar. Medics in the center, fighters at the flanks. "You follow my voice or you die here. Choose." No hesitation followed. They formed up, ragged but ready, fear tempered by the sheer relief of direction. For the first time since I'd set foot in the academy, they weren't seeing me as a fellow cadet. They were seeing me as their commander. The command center was half ruins, half furnace. Screens flickered with static, alarms shrieked from shattered panels, and the air was so thick with smoke it tasted like rust. Broken glass crunched under my boots as I pushed the cadets inside, forcing order into the chaos. "Stations," I barked. "Check power feeds, reconnect comm relays. Anything that still works." They scrambled. Shaking hands found switches, frightened eyes locked on consoles. And somehow, the fractured mess began to breathe again. A tactical map sputtered to life on the main screen, ghosting in and out. Enemy signatures dotted the periphery like glowing coals. Too many. Too fast. I swallowed hard. Focus. If you lose it, they all lose it. "Squad Alpha, block the east wing," I ordered. "Bravo, secure the med bay. Charlie, with me to Delta Hall. We funnel them through choke points and cut supply lines." "Yes, sir." Voices stammered back, almost tripping over the word, "Sir." No one had ever said it to me before. And yet, hearing it didn't feel strange. It felt right. We moved fast. I kept my cadence steady, projecting certainty, even as my ribs screamed and my lungs burned. Every order tightened their lines, sharpened their fear into action. They stopped looking around for officers who weren't coming. They looked to me. "Omega, don't lead," the voice in my head whispered. "Omegas hide. Omegas obey." I crushed it flat. Omega doesn't mean weak, not anymore. Not ever. The corridors boiled with enemy fire. Shadows lunged through smoke. Weapons flaring. Cadets flinched. But they didn't break, not with me shouting them forward. "Shield the medics. Hold formation. On my mark." We pushed. We bled. We held. And through it all, I felt him. Remi. He was everywhere. The line wavered, a storm wrapped in flesh and steel. His blade flashed, his shots struck true, his presence slammed through enemy ranks like gravity. And always, he hovered, just near enough to cover my flank. Once, when I staggered under the recoil of a rifle, he was there, steadying my aim with a hand against my shoulder. His scent punched through the haze, sharp cedar, fierce, alive, and I almost faltered. But then I saw the way he was looking at me. Not like an Omega. Not like a cadet. Like a commander. Like his equal. He didn't say it. He didn't have to. The silent acknowledgement in his gaze fueled me more than adrenaline ever could. Hours blurred into seconds. Fire, smoke, screams, steel. Every time I thought we'd collapse, we found a way to push again. My voice cracked from shouting commands, but it carried. It had to. When the final breach came, we were ready. I'd rerouted our scattered squads into a pincer, forcing the enemy into a narrowing corridor lined with barricades. Now, I roared. Cadets opened fire. The corridor erupted with light and fury. Enemies fell in waves, their advance breaking against us like surf against rock. The last fighter dropped his weapon, stumbled back into the dark. Silence fell so suddenly it hurt. The academy stood. Barely. But it stood. The command center was a graveyard of sparking panels and scorched walls. Cadets slumped against whatever surface would hold them. Some sobbing quietly, some just staring. But alive. I stood in the middle of it all, drenched in sweat and blood, throat raw, body trembling. And yet, inside, there was only clarity. I had led, and they had followed. Omega doesn't mean weakness, I whispered under my breath. It means I survived. From the doorway, Remi watched. The collar at his throat gleamed in the broken light, his face unreadable. But his eyes, cold steel once, burned now with something else, something like pride, something like awe. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Because for the first time, I didn't need his permission to know who I was. The academy was saved. And I had been the one to save it. The training grounds had never been so quiet. Evening settled heavy over the academy, rain-washed and smelling faintly of smoke. The floodlights hummed, throwing long shadows across the scarred mats and cracked pavement. Where hours before chaos had roared, there was only the low rustle of wind through torn banners. I stood alone at the center, mud dried on my boots, my body aching from battle in ways I hadn't yet dared to count. Around me, cadets tended to the wounded, repaired equipment, whispered in reverent tones I pretended not to hear. And then I felt him. Remi's footsteps carried across the empty yard, measured, unhurried. When I turned, he was already there, tall and steady against the glow of the lamps. The steel collar gleamed at his throat, catching the light like a chain. But his eyes, those sharp, unflinching eyes, held something I had never seen before. Not command, not judgment. Something dangerously close to admiration. He stopped in front of me, silent. For a moment, the only sound was the wind tugging at the edges of his coat. Then his hand rose. Slowly, deliberately, he unclasped the mechanism at the back of his neck. The collar clicked, then loosened, falling into his palm with a heavy metallic thud. He let it dangle from his fingers, the inhibitors silent for the first time in years. The air shifted instantly. His scent, unfettered, alive, spilled into the night like cedar smoke after rain. It coiled around me, warm and sharp, tugging at instincts I'd fought all my life to bury. But this time, I didn't flinch. You. My voice rasped, unsteady. What are you doing? Ending this. He held up the collar, then set it down on the ground between us, as if discarding a weapon. For years I thought this was strength, control, discipline. His eyes never left mine, but it was only silence. And you. He stepped closer, the distance shrinking until I felt the heat of him through the chill night air. You are not my weakness, Lucan. His voice was low, rough with something that cut deeper than steel. You are my strength. The words hit harder than any blow he'd ever landed on me. I swallowed hard, 1,000 defenses clawing to rise, to shield me. But none of them worked. Not here. Not now. He extended his hand, open, steady, waiting. Not a command. Not a claim. A choice. My throat tightened. What if I take it? Then I follow where you lead, he said. The laugh that broke from me was sharp, half hysterical. Careful what you promise. I intend to keep leading. The faintest curve tugged at his mouth, dangerously close to a smile. I've already grown used to it. For the first time, the tension coiled in my chest unraveled. My hand shook as I reached out, but I took his anyway, fingers locking with his like they'd been waiting for this moment since the first day on the training grounds. Warmth surged through me, not the fire of instinct unchecked, but the steady burn of something chosen. I stepped closer. He leaned down. And when our lips met, it wasn't the chaos of the fight, or the panic of a bond forced by instinct. It was quiet, voluntary, real. The first kiss I'd ever wanted enough to surrender for. And the first kiss he'd ever given without a chain. The parade grounds looked different in daylight. Clean lines of cadets stood at attention, boots polished to blinding shine, uniforms crisp. Despite the lingering smell of smoke that seemed permanently woven into the academy's bones. And me, standing at the front. Lieutenant Lucan, officer. It still felt strange, wearing the uniform cut for command, the insignia gleaming at my chest. But the stares I caught from the younger cadets weren't questioning anymore. They were waiting, for orders, for guidance. For me. I gave them what they needed, voice firm, steady. The words came easy now. I'd earned them. Behind me, I felt the familiar presence. Remi, silent as ever, watching like the mountain he was. Except now, when our eyes met, there was something shared in the look. A secret no collar could hide. Later, as drills wound down and the cadets broke for water, the whispers started. They say Kyle's bonded. With who? Some Omega. No way. Captain Kyle doesn't do bonds. I heard it's Lieutenant Lucan. Lucan? The Omega? You're kidding. I pretended not to hear, though my ears burned. Jay, lounging nearby with his hands tucked behind his head, smirked like a cat that had stolen the whole dairy. Careful, he stage whispered loud enough for the nearest group. Rumor says if you breathe wrong near Lucan, Captain Kyle personally breaks your ribs. The cadets immediately shut their mouths. One dropped his canteen in panic. I sighed. Jay, what? He grinned wider. I'm improving morale. Before I could answer, the air shifted. The murmurs died on their own. Remi had stepped forward. He didn't need to raise his voice. The yard stilled just by his presence. His gaze swept the gathered cadets, sharp as a blade. You're all very interested in rumors, he said, tone cold enough to freeze the sweat on their necks. So let me be clear. My chest tightened. Oh no. I'm not bound to an Omega. He paused, letting the silence sink, every cadet holding their breath. Then, his voice steady, he finished. I am bound to a leader. Gasps broke the silence. Some cadets exchanged bewildered glances. Others gawked at me like I'd sprouted wings. Jay whistled low, the picture of innocence. My ears burned hotter than the noon sun. Subtle, I muttered under my breath. Remi's eyes flicked to me. For a heartbeat, the corner of his mouth curved just enough to betray the private joke. The cadets scattered eventually, whispers chasing them like leaves in the wind. I stood there, trying not to combust from embarrassment. Until Remi came to stand beside me. You didn't have to do that, I said, crossing my arms. I did. His tone was matter-of-fact. They needed to hear it. I glanced at him sideways. And what about me? His expression softened, just barely. The kind of softness only I got to see. You already know. The warmth that spread in my chest had nothing to do with rank or title. It was something simpler, stronger. Mine, I snorted, trying to cover it. You realize I'm still going to be giving orders, right? I've noticed, he said dryly. And survived it. I grinned. Poor you. He leaned just close enough that only I heard. Fortunate me. Jay, passing with his canteen, made gagging noises. Ugh, get a room. Some of us are trying to stay single and cynical, then walk faster, I shot back. Remi didn't even blink. Or stay, he added coolly, and run extra drills. Jay bolted like his boots were on fire. I couldn't help it. I laughed, full and unguarded, the sound echoing across the grounds. Remi's lips curved, faint but real, and he touched my hand briefly before we walked. Off together, leaving behind the wide-eyed cadets and their unanswered questions. Let them wonder. I was no longer hiding. And for once, the future didn't feel like a cage. It felt like mine.